This is NextGenWeb, and we're here with Blair Levin, former executive director of the Omnibus Broadband Initiative and current fellow at the Aspen Institute. He just delivered a keynote presentation at the Pennsylvania Broadband Summit. Thanks for joining us, Blair.
Thank you very much for having me.
Blair, in your presentation, you discussed that in order to be competitive, society needs to allow everyone to be a knowledge worker and enable the process of knowledge exchange. Can you just discuss how this relates to broadband policy?
Absolutely. One of the things we see happening in the economy is as we're kind of moving from what we might think of as the physical manipulation of actual physical assets. How do you make a car? How do you build a home, etc., to an economy that is much more based on knowledge exchange, where we look at lots of different information, we analyze it, we disseminate it, and we try to find new and innovative ways of creating value for people, whether it be in healthcare or education or a number of different private goods. Essentially, if you think about companies like Google, Amazon, eBay, what is characteristic of them is that they are looking at big data sets, and they're trying to create meaning for people. In each case it's a little bit different, and they're slicing and dicing the data differently. But you see that all throughout the economy. And the point that I was trying to make in the speech is that in the same way that the Industrial Revolution was driven most by the society that most democratized the tools of invention, which was England at the time, the society that's going to do the best in the future is the society that most democratizes the tools of knowledge exchange. And it's really important that our kids in schools learn those skills, but it's also important that all of our workers have both the skills and the tools.
Now, you also touched on the need for policies that interact with the broadband ecosystem and how this will drive innovation and investment in broadband. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. We have a variety of different policies that affect the ecosystem. And by the ecosystem, I mean that kind of combination of networks, devices, and applications. The better the networks you have, the better the devices you can have, the better the applications you can have, and of course that drives better networks as well. In fact, applications is probably the key thing because it is really the way people use things, not the speed in and of itself. And the point that I'm trying to make is, as a policy matter, we devote most of our dollars and most of our political bandwidth to thinking about networks. And in fact, government can be a huge driver if it understands the levers it has. Now, some of those levers affect networks. The two most significant are probably spectrum and universal service. A third, of course, is control over rights of ways. And what we tried to do in the broadband plan was have the government use those levers more effectively. But there's a whole range of things where the government can affect what applications people have. And in fact, people very much want to interact with government data. 5 of the top 10 uses of the internet, in some sense, are interacting with government data. So there's a lot of killer applications out there if governments get their information out effectively.
Now, finally, when discussing broadband in rural areas, you sort of, bucked the trend a little bit and said that it might not be, realistic or cost-effective to get, 100 megabits to, the last 5%. And one of the arguments that you made for this was this, social justice element.
Right.
I was hoping that you could, touch on that a little bit.
Sure. No, we have to have big hearts, but we also have to have tough minds. And one of the criticisms of the broadband plan is that it did not lead a way to having 100 megabits to every home in America. Now, that we estimated that incremental cost, which would be paid for by ratepayers, to be in the neighborhood of $300 to $350 billion. Okay. If we're going to do that, that would result in an assessment on all the current ratepayers of order of magnitude $30 a month, which would mean a number of people, low-income people who are currently on the network, would have to drop because they couldn't afford it. So what's the point of having this incremental increase when in fact we're decreasing the number of people in the society who actually are on broadband? That would make no sense. Furthermore, if we're going to have those kind of expenditures, it seems to me that we ought to be thinking about, as a strategic matter, number one, how do we get more people on broadband? There are 90 million Americans who have access who don't choose to use it. Now, some of them it's by choice, and that's perfectly fine. But some of them it's because of cost, and some of them it's because of they don't have the digital literacy tools. So we ought to be thinking about how do we spend a much, much smaller amount of money to actually drive higher levels of adoption and improve the business case. I'm very much for making sure that all rural America has access to broadband networks. What I'm not for is not doing the cost-benefit analysis of how we spend that money and having it more effective. I would argue, based on what I saw, it may well turn out to be more important for that last 5% to first get 4G. That actually could be more important because so many applications and so many uses are going to be driven to mobile networks. It's also very important that each community have a gigabit because the institutional needs of hospitals and schools and city governments and public safety are such that we really need to focus there. Those are big economic drivers. So I'm just saying that this kind of simplistic view that we need to get incredibly high bandwidth to every home in America ignores both the cost function, but it also ignores where the real strategic benefits are.
Great. Blair, really enjoyed your presentation today, and
thank you very much.
Thank you for talking to NextGenWeb today.
Thank you.